Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of History Quest. Today we are down south in Walnut Grove, Minnesota at the Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum. I'm here with Palmer Hiddesdorf. He is the curator of the museum. He's going to show us around today. How you doing, Palmer?
Good, how are you?
Excellent, excellent. So what can you tell us about the museum? Just real brief about the museum.
Okay, so our museum opened just a month after the start of the TV show in 1974. Originally it started as a gas station just across the street here on Highway 14, and over the years, the community has come together as a TV show kind of gained popularity. We were able to grow, get this building, and since then we've added on multiple exhibits, purchased new properties. So when you first walk into our buildings, this exhibit is actually an original from the 1880s, a depot building from Revere, Minnesota, which is about 10 miles east. And that was moved here and is now currently our Laura exhibit and our TV show exhibit. So when you first walk in here, we have two actual items that belong to Laura Ingalls Wilder. This 9-patch blanket and then the crochet thread. It's her little sewing set. It's kind of interesting because it's originally was used as kind of a tea koozie. I don't know the exact term for it, but she kind of used it for her sewing kits, and these were loaned to us, and they were eventually passed down to her daughter Rose, who we'll talk about a little bit later on. A big part of Laura's story is her faith and church. So here is the first Congregational church that was built in Walnut Grove. Originally, when they moved here, there wasn't a permanent church. They actually met in the building across the street here, which we'll visit later. But about a year after she moved here is when they built the Congregational church. And this pew is from the original building. Unfortunately, in the 1950s, the church was torn down and a lot of the stuff was moved to a newer church, but we do have an original pew. So if you've read On the Banks of Plum Creek, you will know the story of the herd boy when she first arrived here. Through research and kind of tracking, we've been able to locate who it would have been, and it would have been Johnny Johnson. He lived a little bit south of town here, so when Laura and them would come on their way to school or into town, they would have interacted with him. And so his family was able to actually keep a lot of his tools that he had, and they're gracious to loan them to us. So we have these on display. And they are from the 1860s spanning all the way to like the 1880s. So they're very interesting, and it's a great connection that we have. All right, so now we have a couple more artifacts that actually belong to Laura Ingalls Wilder. This is what's her tea set. It's from the 1880s. As well as this ceramic piece from Walnut Grove. It was a souvenir from the 1800s. It belonged to Samuel Masters, who we will later learn is connected to Laura and her family. They were a prominent family here in Walnut Grove, as well as in Burr Oak, Iowa, which Laura has connections to. All right, so one of the biggest things when Laura's family first moved here, Pa wanted to kind of homestead his own land and farm. That's what he originally tried to make his money by. Previously, in 1873, there were locust swarms out west, and at this time, Laura and her family were still living in Pepin, Wisconsin. So in 1874, they moved here and settled in Walnut Grove. And they had heard rumors about the locust plague, but they kind of viewed it as like, oh, it's just kind of a freak thing. It'll pass. Unfortunately for them, the locusts planted their eggs in the soil, and that summer they came back. So Pa's first year here, their crop was completely lost. So then 1875, they decided, okay, we're gonna fight this, we're gonna keep farming, and we're gonna make it work. Well, 1875 came, and it happened again. The locusts tore up everything in their way, and just decimated the agricultural economy here. So here is an actual representation of what a Rocky Mountain locust would have been. They're large, so when they came in, millions of them. They describe it in the books and all accounts basically like a storm cloud just coming in and swallowing the sun. So obviously with Laura and her family kind of having that spiritual connection to religion, a lot of people viewed it as like, the plague coming in. So it was a very scary time, not only for the connection to that religion, but also just the fact that their livelihoods depended on this crop, especially first year moving here. So in 1876, after the second locust infestation came, the family ran into kind of financial troubles and actually left in the middle of the night. Charles Ingalls owed some debt, and they had friends of the masters here in Walnut Grove who opened up a hotel in Burr Oak, Iowa. So in 1876, they decided, hey, we're going to go work for the masters, run their hotel for a little while, and they left. So that happened in 1876. 1877, they came back a year later. And this is when Charles kind of gave up farming. He's like, we're not gonna try our hand at that again. So eventually he would become a carpenter. He built a lot of the structures here in Walnut Grove. He tried his hand at being a butcher, opened up a butcher shop. And then at one point in time, he was also Justice of the Peace in Walnut Grove. So kind of an interesting collection of jobs, especially on the pioneer days. It's kind of like, hey, can you do this for us now? So it's just kind of interesting. So when people think of Laura here in Walnut Grove, one of the first things they think of is the television series Little House on the Prairie. And so one of the comments we get is, there's a lot less hills here. And that's the biggest thing that we dispel between the TV show and the real life of Laura is the fictionalized version versus what actually happened here. So although we appreciate the television show and the attention it's got and we love it, and we have our 50th reunion coming up this year in July, we also do like to kind of, let's keep the fiction and the real history in the real history. But Walnut Grove loves to embrace that story, so we have an exhibit here for it. So here we have a lot of autographs and souvenirs from cast members. Charlotte Stewart, who played Miss Beadle. Grace Ingalls is actually played by two girls. It was Brenda and Wendy Turnbaugh. Dean Butler, obviously, we have a great relationship with him, and he's very helpful to us. So we actually have the original mantle from Little House on the Prairie. This was donated to us by Dean Wilson. And so it's original, it's real. You can come here and visit it and just kind of be sure to get a picture in front of it. It's a really interesting piece, and it's awesome. Along with that, we also have Mr. Edwards' outfit from the TV series. It was donated by Melissa Gilbert's private collection, so she was gracious enough to let us have this. All right, so this is Pa's fiddle from the TV show. Those of you who are familiar, he'd play this before dinner, and he'd play his classic songs from the 1800s. This is also purchased from Melissa Gilbert's estate, and so you can come here and visit it and kind of take a picture with it and have that connection as well. All right, so this is an onion-domed house built in the 1890s. It's been here in Walnut Grove for over 100 years. And this is a very unique architectural form of buildings. You don't see these very commonly. It's based off of kind of the Eastern European style of buildings. So we're very lucky to have this here in Walnut Grove. All right, so this is our Grandma's House exhibit. It's based off of Laura Ingalls Wilder's home at Rocky Ridge in Mansfield, Missouri. So we have a lot of the artifacts that are actually in her house, a lot of her dinnerware, and her table setting is basically, it's modeled pretty much like it. And this is just an interesting perspective into how people in the turn of the century would have lived. Things we'd take for granted, the ice box where you have to go and get ice to keep your ice box cold. And then just all these intricate little things, the coffee grinder, having to grind your own coffee, as well as the stove right here. And a lot of compartments on this, different things. A lot of times this is how you'd heat your home, so you'd have the wood in here. Originally when pioneers moved here, there wasn't a lot of access to wood, so you'd have to find corn and stuff like that to keep your home warm, especially if you're living in a dugout. This is the Wilder Pageant room. Every year the local community puts on a play for Walnut Grove, and it's just a retelling of Laura's story here. Just 2 years ago, the script was rewritten, so we have all new storylines. And it's really funded by the community, by people who come to visit. It's all put on by local community members who audition for the roles. And it started in 1978 in the school gym, just as kind of a fun thing as the TV show is getting big and the books are becoming more popular. And eventually they moved it out to Plum Creek and built a sound stage. And ever since then, it's really evolved over time. You know, whenever we have cast reunions from the TV show, they come and visit, and it's just a great event, a great community event. So if you're in Walnut Grove in July, definitely come check it out. It's worth it. And this year, 2024, it's July 12th to the 13th, 19th to 20th, and then 26th to the 27th. So we hope to see you. So this is our Illustrator exhibit. This pays homage to the illustrators of the Little House books, starting with Helen Sewell and Mildred Boyle. They were the original two illustrators of the books. Theirs came out in the 1930s and 40s, so theirs were the first editions, and they have a very unique illustration style I think is very awesome. But the one that people probably know the most and recognize the most is Garth Williams. He did illustrations for Charlotte's Web, the Little Fur Family, so he's a very renowned illustrator. Up here we have original sketches from the Little House books. You can kind of see the recreations of the scenes, the dugouts here. The top one is the actual sketches. And we were able to acquire these, the original sketch of the book, Little House, or Banks of Plum Creek. So it's just very unique, and we actually have a lot of his sketchbooks, a lot of original sketches from both Garth Williams as well as Mildred Boyle and Helen Sewell. In fact, we actually have a couple. These are both Mildred Boyle sketches. This one is from, I believe, Little House in the Big Woods, and this one is from another one of her works. So we have original sketches of those as well. So this is the writer's legacy room. It covers Laura Ingalls Wilder as well as her daughter Rose Wilder Lane. At the time Laura became famous from her books, her daughter actually had already been a well-renowned author and journalist for about 20-30 years at that point. And she was actually a huge inspiration in the writing style of Laura and kind of fleshing out the manuscripts. When Laura first was writing, she originally wrote Pioneer Girl, which at the time was unpublished, has now been re-released by the South Dakota State Historical Society. And that was basically an autobiography of her life on the frontier, stories that her father told her and stories that she remembered growing up. And initially when she wrote this and tried to get it published, the Great Depression hit. So writers had these vaults of stories that they were using. They didn't want to hire new people because the economy was in the trash. And eventually they kept sending this manuscript out, kept kind of tweaking it, coming back, and eventually they settled on, hey, I don't think adult audiences are really going to enjoy this, but I think they would call it juveniles, and it's essentially kids' books. So they went back to the drawing board, and Laura wrote Little House in the Big Woods, tweaked it for the child audience, and ever since then, they kept bringing her back to write more, and that's kind of where the legacy took off. So Laura was actually in her 60s when she became famous, which is very interesting. Her daughter was much younger when she was. So although Laura is more well-known today, it's kind of interesting to know that at the time, Rose was by far more famous. And with this legacy are the Little House books written. It transcends cultures. We have fan clubs from Japan. We have people who come from Africa, from all over Europe, South America, to come visit here, because Laura's writing is such a moment captured in time, especially on the American frontier, that it transcends culture and people are really interested in it. So here we have a multitude of books that have been translated into, Afrikaans, French, Spanish. I forget the exact total, but her book has been translated in like 100+ languages. So the biggest thing about Laura was that she was very humble and very genuine. And when kids would write to her, she was very unique in that she wrote back to pretty much everybody. We have a couple of original letters. This one is hanging up here. And she was just very gracious in the fact that she would communicate to her young fans and kind of tell her stories of when she was growing up, and just was really communicative in that way. And it's something that you don't really see a lot nowadays, so it's just very interesting. Right, So although we cover a lot about Laura's life here in Walnut Grove, we also have the dual responsibility of curating the local community's history of Walnut as well as the surrounding areas. And one of these ways that we pay homage to our community is through our Veterans Exhibit. We have over 300 veterans documented, at least photographs of people from the Civil War all the way up until the most recent global war on terror. And so this is a great collection of photographs of our local veterans, and with these photographs is a million stories. So getting to explore and learn more about the things these men and women went through, it really drives home that even a small town like Walnut Grove, we do play a greater role in the surrounding world. So it's a very, very humble place to be in here and to just learn about them. So here we have our uniform exhibit. It's kind of separated. So here we have our naval uniforms. We have the Marine Corps dress blues, a World War II Marine uniform, as well as a Vietnam era one. And then up here we have U.S. Army, starting from World War I, World War II, kind of getting to that Vietnam up until the current OCP pattern, which is worn by the U.S. Army today, as well as the dress greens here. And then we have two U.S. Air Force dress uniforms. This first one is from kind of the Korea-Vietnam era, just the first stages of the U.S. Air Force as it was founded just after World War II. And then this one's a little bit more modern, I believe, from like the 90s. And we like to do, this is actually our first one that we've done, a veteran spotlight. And that's just kind of telling the story of a local veteran here in Walnut Grove and just kind of putting them on the spotlight and telling their stories. So this is Bernard Lieferman. He's born here in Walnut Grove. He enlisted in World War II in 1942. And eventually he ended up with a field artillery battalion. And they were really unique in that they trained with pack mules. It's not something that was super common, but they trained with that, moving these big artillery pieces over mountainous regions and stuff like that. So his first deployment was to Kisku Island shortly after the battle that occurred there up in the Aleutian Islands. And at that point, the Japanese had already left, so they were kind of just on defense duty, keeping an eye out and training. So then in 1943, Bernie's unit was redeployed to Naples, Italy in support of the drive north into Rome. At that time, super bloody battles were going on in Italy, and this is kind of the falling of the Italian army and the German army coming in and reinforcing. So throughout that, he was actually awarded the Bronze Star. He was a section leader in his artillery unit, and he was given that kind of as just a recognition of his operations during combat and how effective they were keeping his gun section running. Eventually, they moved up into southern France as the invasion of Normandy occurred, and were instrumental in kind of getting that southern push from Italy. And then towards the end of the war, they ended up, being towards the Rhine River in Germany. And Bernard's unit was actually one of the first units to enter Dachau concentration camp in Germany. And he was able to document many photographs there. We have those in storage. And after all of that, he came home, he settled down, he met his wife, and he just worked for a seed company here, DeKalb Seed, for the rest of his life, just stayed local. And to me, it's just really incredible that men like this going through stuff like that and just coming home and then just being a part of community. That's all they wanted, was come home and live their life. So this is just kind of a recognition for him. So one of our most famous citizens here in Walnut Grove is Leo Thorsness. For those who are not familiar with this story, he won the Medal of Honor during the Vietnam War. In 1967, he enlisted in 1952 during the Korean War, and ended up kind of ranking up and staying until the Vietnam War was going on. So in 1967, he was on a mission to take out some North Vietnamese anti-aircraft installations. And on that mission, his wingman was actually shot down. And he stayed with, tried to patrol the area and shot down a few MiG-17s, Vietnamese jets, just so he could track where that plane went down and ensure that they got the location and that they got a safe rescue. And he actually went back, refueled, and came back and shot down a few more. So that's what he got the Medal of Honor for. Very amazing story. So then 2 weeks later, he was on another fire mission in North Vietnam, taking out installations, and he was actually shot down and captured by the North Vietnamese army. And he eventually became a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton, the famous one where John McCain and many other people were at. He ended up spending 7 years there and basically got to gather intelligence while he was there and just tried to survive and make it out. So in 1973, he was released home. And at that time, a lot of Vietnam vets weren't looked at the greatest. But I think fortunately for him, he had a good home welcoming after all that time being a prisoner. And he ended up moving out and became a senator for Washington. All right, so these are the jail cells from the original Walnut Grove Jail. It was built in the early 1900s. It was actually located in the fire department. At that time, Walnut Grove had a very severe fire in the 1900s, 1903, where a good portion of the north side of town actually burned down. So the fire station, they decided, we should maybe build that after that happened. And these original jail cells were located in there. And visitors here can actually enter, sit on the bunks, and be locked up for a few minutes here. This is where we put our behavior visitors. So here's our Little Red Schoolhouse. It's a replica, scaled down replica of what a traditional late 19th century schoolhouse would have looked like here in rural Minnesota. In the surrounding townships, there would have been local ones for the rural kids to go to, but Walnut Grove actually built one in 1875, a year after Laura would have been here, and that was actually about a block down here where the city park is now. And that's where Laura, she went to school in Wisconsin, but also spent a majority of her time in school here. And eventually she ended up in De Smet, where she finished her schooling, graduated in 8th grade, and then at the age of 15 became the school teacher out there. So, you look at the qualifications you have today where you need a bachelor's and you need certification and all that. Back then, all you needed was an 8th grade education. So it's very interesting how the times have changed. So obviously this has been scaled down, but it's not much smaller than an actual schoolhouse would have been. You would have had pretty much only space for desks and for the teacher. And it's interesting because they weren't really separated by grades at that time, where you have kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade. Most schools would go up to the 8th grade, so you would have 12-year-olds in here with 6-year-olds in here with 4-year-olds as soon as they were able to start going to school. So very different back then for sure. And you'd have to pack your own lunch, bring that with. All right, so in this back corner, you would have had your drinking water with a spoon that everybody would have shared. Germs weren't a thing back then. And then your bowl for washing your hands when you come in, just to make sure that your hands are clean. And that's pretty much it. It would have been really dumbed down basic necessities here for a 1870s schoolhouse. So this is our replica dugout. Right now it's reinforced by concrete and rebar. Obviously in the 1870s that wouldn't have been the case. Right now we're in the process of resodding it, but the sod is not ready. It needs to warm up a little bit for its roots to grow. When you visit here in the summer, if you come, it'll be restored and fresh. So we can enter right in here. So this dugout, the interior was actually built on the dimensions described by Laura Ingalls Wilder out at the Plum Creek site north of town. And at that time there were 5 people living in these quarters. So you have your wood stove here that would keep it heated up. But yeah, basically all you had was a trundle bed, a place to eat, maybe store a few things. But the majority of the time they would have been spent outside working on different chores and whatnot. At this time when Charles moved here, they began building a wood cabin where they'd eventually move into sometime afterwards. All right, so this is our early settlers' home. It's a actual home from the late 19th century. It came from the Ellick Nelson property just south of town here. Ellick and his family actually were here at the same time that Laura was, and she writes about it in Pioneer Girl. So that was moved here many years ago and is now an exhibit recreating what an early settler's home in the 1870s, 1880s would have looked like. If you went from a dugout like previously into this would have pretty much been a mansion for you. You have 2 rooms, you have space upstairs, and you have windows. You have room to operate and do things. So now at this point you would have been able to acquire more goods. When Laura and them first moved here, they originally would have brought everything that was necessary, and that was it. So you'd have your tool kit, you'd kind of have your eating space and space to cook. You'd have a wood stove, your laundry space. Each location would kind of have its own space, similar to how it would nowadays. And then over here, you'd have your sleeping quarters. Upstairs, as described with Laura, they had a loft, and her and Mary actually were so excited because they finally got their own bedroom, and it would have been just a tiny little loft, but they would have slept separately upstairs. So this is our covered wagon, and it covers all the necessary goods that you would need here if you were traveling on the frontier. It looks like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, this would have been all that you would have been able to take. Right now we have a doll in there that kind of replicates Laura sitting in it, but a lot of the times you wouldn't have been in back. There would have been not a ton of room. So for a good majority of your walk, you would have been walking alongside it. So then anytime if you've played like the Oregon Trail games, a lot of times when you'd come across creeks or rivers, you'd have to ford it. And there just was not a lot you could bring with. It was very heavy, and you had to have a couple oxen. So when Charles Ingalls got here in Walnut Grove, they actually sold their oxen. They no longer needed them, and they unpacked in the dugout and stayed there. So this is the original Master Store and Hall building. It was built during Laura's time here. And his connection, as we talked about previously with the Masters family, William J. Masters was the owner of this building. Initially, he built this as a general store, with the second place being a meeting hall. Attached on this side would have been the hotel that was open previously. It has since been torn down, but Laura describes working in that, setting tables in that hotel. And then over here, this building is significant because Charles Ingalls actually helped build this building. As I said earlier, he was a carpenter, so we have documentation that he worked on this building and helped build it. Also, before the church, the Congregational church was built here in Walnut Grove. The church would have met upstairs here, as long as the Masons and all kinds of community clubs. And Laura talks about winning a Bible in her contest at church. It actually happened upstairs. The Bible is still in Mansfield, Missouri. So this is an actual location that Laura would have spent a great amount of time in. All right, so this is the upstairs of the Master Store and Hall. This would have been the hall portion. And all of this wood here is original, would have been hammered in by Charles Ingalls, as well as other townspeople of that time. There are original wallpaper and original 1870s newspapers that were uncovered on these walls, so that's how we know it's the original, as well as signatures written along the wall in pencil. So there are two signatures on this corner here. It's J. Evans and then Orabelle Masters. So the Masters' last name sounds familiar. Well, that's the granddaughter of William J. William A. was the son of William J. Eventually, this property was passed on to William A., and his daughter remained in the area. So that's how we know these are the original signatures, because we've been able to track down who specifically they were. And this is dated October 1876. So if you come to the museum, don't forget to check out the Dugout Site. That is where Laura originally settled at. The dugout indentation is there. Obviously with sod, it has since fallen apart. But the creek is right there, the tablelands, all of that, the plum thickets, just as she described in the books on the banks of Plum Creek. You can go visit that site this summer. It closes in November, so be sure to go out there, get some pictures, and walk the path that Laura walked on.
If you're going around looking for a place to go, things to see, come down to Walnut Grove, check this museum out. So again, thank you very much. And with that, we are out for this month, but stay tuned next month when we go to another interesting historic space for another episode of History Quest. Thanks.